Welcome, and thank you for coming to the final event in the NYU Reynolds Speaker Series, Social Entrepreneurs in the 21st Century. I'm Caroline Weinberg. I'm a third-year med student and a fellow in the Reynolds program. For those of you who don't know about it, the Reynolds program in social entrepreneurship brings together a group of students from the 14 different NYU schools with the common belief that an individual with support and motivation can actually change the world. We'll have the opportunity to listen to one such changemaker tonight, Dr. Paul Farmer. During a trip to Haiti in the 1980s, Dr. Farmer met a community that was in desperate need of healthcare. He subsequently started a clinic there, and then while he was in med school at Harvard, started Partners in Health with a group of his friends in medical school. This organization is based on the premise that healthcare is a right and not a privilege, and also acknowledges the fact that while providing healthcare to individuals is a right, there are also other needs that are necessary to address. So, to this end, Partners in Health works to provide clean water, safe housing, and education to the communities with which it works. The organization then expanded until it's international, working with millions of people worldwide and providing healthcare to communities who are most in need around the world. What Paul Farmer and Partners in Health have done is inspiring not just to people who are in the healthcare industry, but to anyone who believes that you should see a problem in the world and work to change it. Anyone who believes that they should implement social change. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Dr. Paul Farmer.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Caroline. It's good to be back. I feel like I'm sort of the staple invitee of this program. Is this my third year in a row? Now there's a little, is that right, Gabe? The downside of that is I have to think of something new to say every time. And last year I gave a talk that I think it was, I looked at it to see that I didn't have overlap. Oh yes, you did tell me. Thank you, Nate. Sorry. Is that better? In the YouTube generation, you can never put this thing on too late. Last year, I made a comment in the middle of my NYU talk that I asked them to strike from the recording. Remember that? It had to do with violations of the Geneva Convention, but never mind. The substance of my talk, huh? People can watch it. Oh no, don't. The last year I talked about, I think it was called a loyal critique, an insight of the notion of entrepreneurship. And just to go back so that I obviously this was in a different place, not at the medical school, and I'm just curious how many people were at that. I don't know why you should be, but see, I did all this extra work just for you. But to summarize the argument last year, I was talking about different paradigms of engagement in this work. And I mentioned I was using a rights paradigm. That's easy to use. It feels convivial to me. There are seats up front, by the way, at least 3 or 4. And but it's not the only paradigm, the rights paradigm. It's a very helpful one, and in teaching, actually, a couple of my students from Harvard are here today. I mentioned there's a couple of reasons to work in the public sector, even as an NGO or a church group or whatever that brings you to places like rural Haiti. And one of them is scale, of course, right? You scale up things in the public sector. Another is rights, and how does that work, the connection between public sector and rights? As we think about, and I didn't think about I've been working in Haiti for 25, 26 years, really didn't think about this in the first 10 years or so, which some people regard as slow, but the point I'm trying to make here is you can catch up if people like me share this information. So we were working with community groups, with church groups, with women's organizations, peasant cooperatives, et cetera, and that was why we called it Partners in Health 20-something years ago. So we wanted to work in partnership, but we weren't working so much with the public sector. There are reasons for that. We went to Haiti in the middle of a family dictatorship. It wasn't a very convivial partner. But we thought later, here we are talking all the time about the right to health care, the right to primary education, the right to clean water, but who confers rights, or which institutions confer rights? The government does. So I grew up not thinking very much about would I have the right to go to high school or junior high school. It never crossed my mind. I remember we didn't have, we're a family of 8, didn't have health insurance when you, as a lot of Americans don't to this day. And when we were headed off to school, there were regulations about vaccination, right? So you couldn't go to school until you had vaccination. So then you went to the public health clinic, which I remember as vaguely embarrassing. But that's where we got our shots. And then you go to school and say, see, my kids are vaccinated. And we go to school all the way through to the end of high school. And without a thought about it. And that's, of course, not what a lot of people expect. A lot of people living in poverty cannot expect to have the right to go to school or have clean water, and certainly not the right to health care, which we also don't have in our affluent country. So the rights paradigm is a good one for those two reasons. One that I've made explicit is you can hope to bring things to scale outside of, but in a complementary way to what you might want to call a market paradigm, complementary to, and I'll go back to that. And another is that it's sort of the last best hope for people living in poverty. Because as we're working with entrepreneurial ideas to create more jobs, and I'll go back to those, there still needs to be some kind of safety net, right? And so we can say, yes, you know, you can't be a customer, or as is often the term these days in medicine, a client, but you have a safety net. So you have the right to basic health care and education. And that's something I think worth fighting for, and the rights paradigm is helpful for that. But I said it's not the only paradigm. Another one that is very common among my crowd, which let's just call ourselves public health nerds, as to use the scholarly term most commonly in use at NYU. So public health nerds, what do? Well, we talk about public goods for public health. A friend of mine who's here tonight is a distinguished tuberculosis doctor. And what we have when we're diagnosing and treating TB is the hope that we can do this not as a commodity, but as a public good for public health. And now, how did we get that when we don't have the right to health care in our country? Probably because this is an airborne disease. And there'll be questions, no doubt, or comments or thoughts about swine flu. But when you have a public health problem, it's not supposed to be a private problem. It's supposed to be a public problem. So public goods for public health, another paradigm, really complementary to the rights-based paradigm. In my experience working in public health and in academic medicine, people are a little bit, in those circles, are a little bit uncomfortable with the rights paradigm, which is a strange thing. It probably has its roots probably in the 20th century, not so much in the 19th century, where public health was predominantly a rights-based focused in the late 19th century. It didn't have the tools we have now, but I think an easier attitudes towards rights. But it doesn't matter that much. So there's the first of two paradigms I mentioned last year. And the third one, which is very common in groups who consider themselves entrepreneurial. Hey, I just noticed you guys up there. Some wave back. Others are YouTubing or whatever you guys do in your generation. Next thing I'll know, there'll be people twittering or tweeting. I can't keep up with this. Anyway, the next paradigm, and the third one that I talked about last year, is economic development. And who's against that? Nobody. Everybody wants to see economic development. I was teaching a class in January at Harvard, and I had a student he was a med student at Brown, and he was doing a public health degree at Harvard. And I was talking about Haiti, and I was talking about some unpleasant matters around U.S. foreign policy in Haiti. And he looked a little bit frustrated, not by the story, but he said to me after class, I'm glad it was after class, he said, so, Dr. Farmer, you've been working there 25 years. Is everything just as bad where you were working as when you started? Subtext being, wouldn't that be a bad reflection on you? And so I did. I laughed a little bit too, and I said, "Well, let me just." He said, I said, "What are the metrics by which we would gauge change?" I started having this methodological conversation. And I realized he didn't care about that. So I said, "Well, let me put it this way. When I first went, and Caroline, in introducing, said it was a desperate community. She didn't say why, but it was a squatter settlement. Some of you have been in a squatter settlement, And squatter settlements are formed all over the world when people, often when they lose land. They lose land because of the collapse of an agricultural market or violence, all sorts of reasons. And in Haiti, the reason was that this valley had been flooded for a hydroelectric dam. And an old story, which I've told before and at this university, and I will not bore you with the details, but they received, the people who were displaced, they were peasant farmers, that's a local term as well, and they received neither compensation for the land nor water, to say nothing of electricity. So a bad deal all around. And when I went there, I was young and idealistic. Now I'm just old and idealistic. And I remember people would, I was telling this to a student from Brown. Anybody else here from Brown? Well, Candace, you're from Brown. Anybody else? Candace, I hope you'll agree that students at Brown are kind of smart alecky. Yes? I'm just kidding. The Harvard students are worse. I'm telling this kid about, when I first got there, people were saying, not to me, but to all those of us who went there to work, we're hungry, do you have any food? And now, 25 years later, this is my metric for you, I get emails from people saying, you promised us Windows XP. So I submitted to my student that was very robust evidence of change. Now, those three paradigms, again, can't be original thinking, right? The three paradigms. Somebody else probably has formulated this much more elegantly than I have. But it was revelatory to me to understand how the rights paradigm, the public health paradigms, and economic development paradigms could be very complementary to each other and really serve to reinforce each other. Because who's against economic development? The problem with a lot of development thinking, as far as I can tell, is that it does not address inequality. And the measures of economic development do not include a lot of metrics around equity or equality. And so, you get this idea that a rising tide will lift all boats. Well, that would be great. But when those boats don't get lifted, again, they need a safety net. And let me tell you, in my line of work, there are a lot of people who need safety nets who are not getting them. And so that's my background for those 99% of you who did not attend my talk last. I should have just given the same talk, Gabe. So I want to give some examples all that are all from the past year, and have a critical reflection on the promise of entrepreneurship, which is why we have this program. It does say entrepreneurship, right? But also the limitations, because there is no panacea, and I guess that's my kind of dreary hypothesis. There is no magic bullet. There is no panacea. Nothing is going to save us or spare us the need for hard work and discernment and engagement. And again, the rights paradigm has a lot of promise, even if you're interested in entrepreneurship. And in other words, there's a dark side to this model, as there is to every model, the development model, the microfinance model, because when we push these models forward as if they are the answer to the problem, we run into other problems. That doesn't mean we don't use them judiciously, but we have to remember there isn't a magic bullet. Let me give some examples and show the promise and limitations. Now, some of you, almost everybody here knows that Haiti was struck in 1 month by 4 hurricanes. And I didn't take that particular photo, but I did take some other ones I'll show you in a minute. And I remember flying in to Port-au-Prince, and you fly over the northern, from Miami, as you might imagine, you fly over the northern edge of Haiti and all the way to the middle of the country, where the city is a little bit south. And right over it, you could just see in an American Airlines flight that this city was underwater. It's a pretty stunning thing. In fact, I thought that I saw an image in the newspaper of a U.S. Coast Guard cutter steaming into the city, which is Go Naive, and looking up at a boat towering over a city. And I looked everywhere for that image and realized that I had seen it myself. And it had that nightmarish quality where you later think, I couldn't have seen that. I have a friend here who's a photographer. He knows what I'm talking about. And it was terrible, And if those interested in the details of these storms can read on the PIH website about the storms themselves and about some of the responses to them. But that's not my purpose here. There are all kinds of storms. There are financial crises, and there are natural disasters, but in the end, they're not really natural disasters. I mean, the storms, this is Hannah, this is after Hannah, and Hannah was one of the hurricanes that really whacked this city. And I wrote to my coworkers from this city, my coworkers at Partners in Health. So, and actually, a member of our board of Partners in Health is here tonight. He's from New York. I wrote them a note saying, I have never seen anything as bad as this, except in this very same city 4 years ago. And, you know, I've been, you know, some people don't like to do comparative. In my line of work, you have to compare. You know, you have to do triage. But you have to do it in a good way. You don't say, well, swine flu is not really very important compared to regular flu, because that's always a self-defeating kind of thing. But when you have a bad FEMA, you could say, is bad FEMA better than no FEMA? Probably. And again, that's not a popular thing to say, but Haiti lost 16% of its GDP in 1 month because of these storms. And it was a very stunning thing to see. And that was just the first month. Now, what happens if you went back months later? Now, this is not from months later. I actually, out of order a little, this was the Saturday after Hurricane Hannah struck Gonaïves. But this is not Gonaïves. This is where we work, in central Haiti. And that Saturday afternoon, there was a bridge in the town of Mirebalais. Now here's the story of a natural disaster. You're not going to get this from anywhere but me, because I haven't seen anybody write this down. So on that Saturday, we were in this town of Mirebalais, and we walked across this bridge to the rundown hospital. And with the Prime Minister of Haiti, and it was her first day on the job. How's that for a nice first day? It got worse. So because that night, after we left, Hurricane Ike hit Haiti. That night, Saturday night, into Sunday morning. And we, I didn't know about this because we walked back, the bridge was fine before Hurricane Ike hit, but it caused a flash flood. It hit a UN camp. Remember, there's a UN military presence in Haiti. Some of you, maybe some people here today are from the UN. And I'm not of the John Bolton blow off the top 10 floor school, so don't get me wrong. I thought you would laugh at that more, but I guess it's still too raw a memory. Anyway, so Hurricane Ike hit, caused a flash flood, hit the UN military encampment, and what do they have in the military encampment? They have, can you see there? Containers. It's sort of the coin of the realm for international trade, right? So that's what things are moved in and out of places like Haiti and all over the world. So the containers were empty, I think, and they got swept into the stream and they pulled down the bridge. Now, again, natural disaster, well, kind of, I guess, but also not so natural. And I had been in Haiti, as I said, 25 years, have been in Haiti 25 years, more, and this is in the middle of a town in central Haiti, Hensh. I've never heard of it flooding before. And these are actually my coworkers from Zami La Santé, which means Partners in Health in Creole. And they're community health workers and a social worker who are going to look for stranded people, stranded patients. In the corner is Maxine Waters, who's been a staunch supporter of Haiti, and she was calling for aid to Haiti. And I don't think it's really gotten there, because from what I hear, first of all, here's a picture of now. That's September 12th, 2 weeks after Hurricane Hannah hit. The town's still underwater. And in fact, from what I read, there's a very good journalist named Neil Farquhar from the New York Times. He was there recently, and we work close by, and so we know this to be the case, but he just did a report. It's still underwater. Now, that's for reasons that are part geographical. It's in a floodplain. But the mud's still there, and there are people who are really still displaced. And I guess what struck me is the failure. It struck a lot of Haitians, too, both Haitians in Haiti and Haitians here in the United States and places like New York, that the failure of the aid machinery to help the really vulnerable in this country and elsewhere has been troubling. Now, the last point I'm going to make using this metaphor and reality of the storms is water. I'm going to talk about water. Water everywhere, as in the case of Gonaïves, which is still, like I said, I've never seen anything really like it, and to imagine this goes on and the waters don't recede. They do a little bit, but you know, what about these people? Who's going to take care of them? And I thought, well, there are lots of development assistance organizations, emergency relief programs. And when I went there the first couple of times to this town, I saw scores and scores, well, hundreds and thousands of people leaving the city on foot. And you were looking around, where are the water stations? Where are first aid? There are people who are obviously stepping on things and getting cut, to say nothing of drowning. So probably 800 to 1,000 people were just killed outright. But then I just wonder, where is the assistance machinery? So we ended up getting very involved, as some of you know. We had a lot of, we basically wrote to our supporters and said, look, you know, we're not a disaster relief organization, but you know, maybe we should pitch in more. Can you, our supporters, help us? And we had the most incredible response to that appeal. Just really, a very substantial fraction of those we asked for help sent us resources so that we could end up being a sort of part-time disaster relief agency. But that doesn't get at the roots of vulnerability. That's the least you could do, right? Is a friend of mine whose daughter is here says, she talks about, as we learned in Catholic school when we were little, the corporal works of mercy. All right? Feed the hungry. This is what we call, well, feed the hungry, clothe the naked, et cetera. You guys know all this. I've been joking with my students at Harvard that I'm hoping to win a Nobel Prize because I'm going to show conclusively, after several years of NIH-funded research, that we've discovered for the treatment for malnutrition, and it's called food. Now, you can't slake the thirst of people without water. And so we came in with stuff like this, which is really not a very inspired response. But we knew that for years, over a decade, the official development machinery had promised to help Haiti with water projects. And we'd been tracking some of them. And during the early part of the last decade, 2000 to 2004, there was an effort, which we documented abundantly, and this doesn't win me popularity contest for saying this. There was an effort to shut down assistance to the government of Haiti. This is largely from our government, the US government. Now, why is that, you ask? You know, I think people should ask. I can say this as historical fact. For at least a century, the United States was only too happy to give direct support to whatever government was in place. From 1915 to 1934, that government was put in place by us because we had a military occupation of Haiti. Again, I grew up in Florida, never heard of it. Just right nearby. I didn't know. I didn't know anything about 20 years as military occupying force. And since then, you know, we've had in place a number of Haitian governments more or less hospitable or with good relations between our governments and theirs. So we didn't stop supporting official aid to the government of Haiti until the Haitians had their first elections. And then we shut down. And this happened, you know, follow it. Just from 1986, I was already in medical school. I'd already been working in Haiti for 3 years. 1986, the fall of the family dictatorship. Just follow those years yourself. Don't trust me on this. 1986 to 2000, and let's say 2004. See what happened. Now, what we did was to say, well, you know, that Wosh non Soleil, for those of you who don't know, I don't think we should have used a Haitian term for our, it's not really catchy, you know. It's kind of like, I once wrote a book, a huge bestseller, Women, Poverty, and AIDS. I know you all read it. And it sold like 4 copies. And I thought, well, I know how to move it. I'll give it a really cool subtitle, which was Sex, Drugs, and Structural Violence. That added 1 extra copy sold. So here's another, probably not our best choice. Wosh non Soleil is part of a Haitian proverb. It's a really scary but affecting proverb, as are so many Haitian proverbs. And the proverb goes, the rocks in the water don't understand the pain of the rocks in the sun. You know, it's again, a deeply affecting metaphor. And so the rocks in the sun, of course, are the poor, who have to suffer under the blinding heat. So we were thinking, well, we don't rely on this kind of assistance, official assistance. through development banks. Those are really credits to governments, right? And I don't want to pick on any one because, you know, they're small and defenseless organizations. Quite defensive sometimes, by the way. These big, giant, never mind, I'll stop. But let me just get back to the general principles and not the specifics. I did go into the World Bank once. I'd never been, only once. I went there to give a talk. And you walk in, I had on this suit. And so I looked like a banker. And maybe even a world banker. I know this is going to be on YouTube, and they're probably going to, you know, get mad at me. But so I walk in, I have my briefcase, and there's a metal detector and security, and so I put my briefcase in and walked through, and there were some women working there, of course, working security, and I could tell they were from West Africa. I wasn't sure where, and they were talking to each other, and I couldn't understand what they were saying. But I recognized, I thought, you know, they're from somewhere in West Africa. And I said, excuse me, and this woman looked startled, like she wasn't often addressed by the bankers going in and out. I'm sure that can't be true, but she did look startled. I don't think it was anything else. And she said, yes, and the silence fell over this group of 4 women. They had been talking to each other, thinking, who is this guy and why is he talking to us? And there's this big thing in gold letters, which is the motto of the World Bank, so something like fighting to end poverty everywhere or something like that. Someone here will know the real. And all I did, quite innocently, was I pointed that and said, do you believe that that's true or not? She fell down laughing so hard, and they all started, I had to almost scrape them off the floor. That's all I said, really, was, do you believe that's true or not? Evidently, they had some issues with the veracity of that statement. But I'm not going to pick on any of these small, little, fragile development banks. I mean, by the way, the IMF, what is the IMF, the new savior for the world? Are you guys watching the newspapers? Are you reading? Like the financial crisis, who's going to fix it? The IMF, right? For right now, no more comment from me. But what I did say is, even though we, in the NGO, university-affiliated, whatever community, do not receive this kind of assistance, it does matter to us what happens with it. Right? And here's been the biggest problem, I think, and you're thinking I'm forgetting about entrepreneurial engagement. The biggest problem that I've seen from Haiti, and also in Africa, where I've been working a lot for the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, is a failure to coordinate in any way these entrepreneurial engagements. And in Haiti, that means millions and gajillions of NGOs. That's not counting church groups. Last 6 months, every flight I'm on is just packed with do-gooders. Now, I'm saying do-gooders in a neutral way, a little bit more neutral than asking the ladies, what do you think about that? And it's worrisome, right? Because people are there to, you know, including the engineering nerds. I love engineers, by the way. I was just at Virginia Tech, and this journalist from the Roanoke Times came up to me and said, so how are you enjoying Virginia Tech? I said, it's great, got a lot of engineers here. And I was kind of joking. I said, you know, engineers are like the orthopedic surgeons of, you know, development work. I was just kidding. It was in the paper next day. Now, I'm not sure anyone could understand that, but what I meant is they fix things, you know. I like that. There's a deep pragmatism about orthopods. Any orthopods here? Then I can say whatever I want. It's not going to be on YouTube. There's a running joke in medicine, which is not very charitable, about orthopedic surgeons, and here's the joke, since there are none here to defend themselves. What's the best way to hide something from an orthopedic surgeon? Put it in the literature. Now that is such a put down at Harvard. It's not true. It's not true. I was hit by a car, so actually I have a deep debt to orthopedic surgeons. Seriously. So it was a compliment. I'm just not sure the people at Virginia Tech, they looked at me blankly. Now, what about engineers and pragmatism in water? Is entrepreneurial projects, there are plenty of those. The question is, how do you coordinate them so that they add up to something bigger than the sum of our parts? That's the biggest problem that I've seen so far in my line of work, in our line of work. A lot of you are doing this work. And when I go out in the world, in the great wide world, I say this a lot more and more as the years pass. I said, is there any way we could work together better, or could we coordinate? Because Haiti is a living memorial. It's a graveyard of development projects, as anybody knows who follows it. NGO work and all kinds of work there. And it's very troubling to, as my student from Brown/Harvard said, that was his point, is after 25 years, don't you have any results to show for it? Now, fortunately, we do. But do we have national results to show for it? No. And I'm going to get back to that. Now, why can't Haiti respond? Well, it's an environmental and social and political disaster, not a natural disaster. It is also a natural disaster because the trees are gone. This town's in a floodplain, as are lots of others. But there's other ugly stories about aid that are worth knowing. Now, for those of you who could brave 500 footnotes, I love footnotes. Has anybody noticed how much I love footnotes? Some of the students have. Thank you. I went to the University of Texas, San Antonio a few months ago, and this kid came up to me, a medical student, and said, "Oh, Paul Farmer." And I thought he was going to say, "I love your work," or, "You're a credit to our profession," or something really nice. He said, "Oh, Paul Farmer, I thought you'd be a cranky old man." And I'd never met him before, and I said, "Oh, really, why is that?" And he said, "Because I've read your books." And it's true, they're cranky, but I'm not cranky. It's the subject material that's difficult. So this report, which you can find online on the PIH site, is just recently, we just put it out there with, you can see it, our friends at NYU. Who here, anybody here work on this report? I did a good job coordinating with my friends, clearly. So our friends at NYU Law School, that's got to be the reason why, that Robert F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, just call it that, human rights, they'll kill me. Robert F. Kennedy Memorial. Really serious, hard pipe-hitting lawyers. And then the Partners Health Sister Organization, which is Amis de la Santé in Haiti. So we worked on this a long time, years actually. That's why all the footnotes, trying to say, what went wrong with this aid? Who blocked it? How? How did it work? And then finally, so what's happening to the people who would have, in principle, benefited from the water? We went to Northwest Haiti. Actually, since this person is not here today, no? I can get away with more like with the orthopods? So there was an NYU student. If the dean of the law school is here, I'm not telling this story. If the dean of the medical school is here, I don't care. So she went to Northwest Haiti and to do a water security project with us, and she gets typhoid in 5 minutes. So then we have to, and I wasn't there, I was thinking, her parents are going to kill me. That's how bad it is. And if you think a guest from the United States gets sick who has access to things like this, you can imagine what's happening to local people. It's all there in the report. It's not pretty. But we need to understand what makes some people vulnerable and really in need of either being entrepreneurs or receiving the largesse of entrepreneurial type endeavors. Now this is in my line of work, I mean in development and global health equity, et cetera. Now let me keep on exploring this theme about the limitations. I talked last year about our work in Rwanda, and as far as I can tell, it's the only slide that I used last year. I told the story of how we went to Rwanda, and we went to this hospital, which I said, "Oh, you can send us to a more difficult hospital because the hospital had electricity," and so they'd send us here. Now there's an entrepreneurial side to this, right? To go out and say, well, we can go into a rural area and put in place a comprehensive primary health care program with our Haitian colleagues. In fact, I remember getting a little choked up when I was telling you that the most wonderful thing, I'm about to choke on my gum, so turn your heads. The most wonderful thing for me probably was being able to go with my Haitian colleagues to work in Africa. It was very emotional, and they were very effective, and they are effective. We're working in Rwanda, Malawi, Lesotho, and a little bit in Burundi. Actually, anybody from our Burundi partners here? Again, bad planning on my part. So I went in there, and we knew what to do. To rebuild public infrastructure, I told you why public infrastructure already. So entrepreneurial usually means private, right? And people talk about the private sector. Again, we got to be careful. I'm from the private sector. I mean, I work for a small community-based college in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And Partners in Health is private sector. It's a non-governmental organization. So this is an insider critique. To elevate the private sector to say this is the answer to our problems of poverty is not, it's neither true nor smart. It's nice when things that are false are also stupid. So we can't do that. Sometimes it's entrepreneurial to engage the public sector. Now that should shock people. How can it be entrepreneurial to engage the public sector? It's because and I don't want to use too much jargon from politics, but This term neoliberal policy always hit home with me because I heard it so much in Haiti and then in Peru and then in Chiapas and then in Guatemala. I learned it not from reading so much, although I later read, what is neoliberal policy? What does it mean? And I couldn't define it succinctly for you here today, but basically, so much of a celebration of the private sector that the public sector can shrink and be ignored. And I think we've seen this a little too much in public education and public health in the United States. You know, I was alarmed to read in the New Yorker last week, there's a piece in the talk of the town. It's such, it's short, I love it. There's a piece on, it's called on the cover, it said environmental defeatism. Anybody else read that? 2 people. Great. The New Yorker, it's your magazine. So anyway, the woman who wrote it basically said that you think, you know, we're having this green moment now and people are paying attention to global warming, and then she just went back to the major legislation of environmental protection was much more ambitious than what we're doing now, and it was passed under Nixon. Now that troubled me a little bit. There was 20 million people, evidently, who celebrated Earth Day. Now, I would happily be spared the celebration of Earth Day with a bunch of hippies, but the good thing is that there were 20 million of them. And I don't think there were 20 million, 20. I've just started. All right. Anyway, entrepreneurial. It becomes entrepreneurial sometimes to work with the public sector. Now, let me give some examples and then go back to some more, I would say, more conventionally entrepreneurial ideas about breaking the cycle of poverty and disease. Now, I checked to make sure I didn't show this last year. I did show it 3 years ago here, shortly after this picture was taken by a student of mine. I got into a little trouble, too, because I told the story of how I was consulted, and that was here in New York, at NYU, in fact, that I offended someone. Now, I'm only telling this now with historical accuracy, not to offend anyone again, but I was saying that I was called to see this young man. His name's Joseph. 26, that's his mother, and a student of mine from Harvard Medical School, who's now a colleague of mine, this is in 2003 rather, March, as you can see, he called me and he said, Paul, can you come and see this patient for us? I said, sure. Tell me about him. This is email. I was about an hour and a half away. This is a long way. And he said, well, he's 26 years old, and he gave me all the details. He had HIV disease and tuberculosis. That's a short version. And I wrote back unwisely, sure, I'd be glad to see him, but why don't you guys take care of him? And you and the Haitian team are so experienced in this. Now, of course, I wanted my student to say to me, because you are the world's greatest infectious disease doctor. But as with Brown, Candace, so with Harvard, he did not say that, and he said instead, we want you to come and cheer him up. So I wrote back, what am I, Clowns Without Borders? Now, I said this at NYU 3 years ago, and someone came up to me afterwards and said, we're from Clowns Without Borders, please don't make fun of us. I said, I wasn't. That really happened. That really happened. So I actually am a supporter of Clowns Without Borders, but my only point was, you can't make this stuff up. Anyway, so why is this entrepreneurial? PEPFAR means the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. GFATM means Global Fund. These did not exist. In 2003, the Global Fund made its first disbursement. There had never, ever before been a multinational disbursement mechanism to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. And yet, tuberculosis and malaria have been around forever. AIDS has been around for a long time. So it becomes entrepreneurial sometimes just to pay attention to the problems of poor people. That to me is stunning, is that it becomes entrepreneurial just to pay attention to these problems and to think hard about how to do this in the public sector so poor people don't have to rely on handouts. And that's why I'm interested in applying critically this notion of entrepreneurship to some of the public health problems that we're doing. Now, this is the same guy. You're not surprised. I think I showed pictures last year. You'd think it was the same guy, but that was a guy from Rwanda. But I would put it this way. Once you get that near death, everybody looks the same. In fact, someone said to this guy, Joseph, it turns out he's a bit of a wiseacre. They looked at these pictures and said, you're like a whole new person. He said, no, this is the real me. That was the not real me, pointing to his skeletal self. And if it becomes entrepreneurial to actually do this kind of work, then there's a problem with the way we see the world, not with the notion of entrepreneurship. Now, can you spread this up, scale this up? Yes, you can. These red dots are public sector clinics and hospitals. I talked about this last year. I don't want to repeat myself, especially since I have people pointing signs at me. But you know, what we saw is private hospitals that really were empty, and because there were user fees. So again, what's the entrepreneurial thing to do? Remove the user fees, which again is a direct contravention of neoliberal orthodoxy. And that's one of our big fights right now, is with the international financial institutions still to this day, because their message to these countries, the countries we're working in, is you cannot have public sector spending or government spending. You need to invest in, your job is to attract direct investment and export, import, et cetera. Now that's a crude rendering of their message, but that is often the message that gets into these governments. And they're being told this is how you break this cycle of poverty and disease. Now, is it? Maybe. It hasn't worked so well yet. Certainly trade rather than aid, as people love to say, that's true. But you have to have, again, this safety net. And it's so fallen out of fashion now that it's almost entrepreneurial to suggest that this be so. This is, some of you have been here. This is here's our entrepreneurial idea. Again, it's shockingly obvious. Is it possible to take this new interest in AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria, whatever it may have been, and invest it in strengthening health systems in general, and, as Caroline said, in attacking lack of access to education, healthcare, water, et cetera? I think the answer is yes. We did not take money from PEPFAR, necessarily, and rebuild this hospital from the ground up, the same one you just saw, but kind of close. Now, we had a lot of supporters, but we also were able to build these programs thanks to the Global Fund. By the way, the first disbursement they ever made was probably to Haiti, probably to this project. And that's because, we said, hey, let's have a new idea. Well, I know, let's be entrepreneurial. Why don't we actually treat the poor? I mean, not rocket science. Or as our former president would say, not nuclear science. Now, what about other partnerships? Now, this is just to show you some and then open it to discussion. So this is another public sector institution. Some of you recognize my coworker, Lune Viau, in the front. I have a friend I haven't seen in some years, still working with her. And she's taught, the guy with the plans in his hand is the district health commissioner, again, the public sector. And this is an ambulatory clinic in the largest town in central Haiti. And as you can see, it desperately needs to be redone. So we're now working with a student group at Virginia Tech, which is why I went there, Engineers Without Borders. Anybody here with Engineers Without Borders? Yeah, a couple. I have sometimes argued that there's another group in medicine, Doctors Who Need Borders. But the idea here is that we can build partnerships, but the thing that we really need is to have the delivery side attended to. Like there's lots of plans, you can't see them very well, but there's plans up in the corner. We get plans all the time. What we really need is the funding and resources and commitment to follow through. That's what I would say. Let me just give a couple, these are obvious, water projects. Why should we do water projects? We need engineers to help us with that, and sanitary engineers, people who know about pipes, or as they say in New York, who know from pipes. Hard pipe hitting pipe fitters. Now, we also need to address the root causes, right? What are the root causes? I already said that they're political and social and environmental. And that means food security, or what the Haitians say now, food sovereignty. And I'm barely scrambling to keep up. I know how to diagnose and treat malnutrition. Again, I'm waiting for my Nobel Prize in Science for discovering that food is the treatment for malnutrition. But it's actually a little bit more complicated than that. These grains are locally acquired grain. So we're trying not to undermine the local farmers. It's quite complicated. And then we're turning them into ready-to-use therapeutic food so that we can treat malnutrition. But we want to prevent malnutrition. And that's around land reform, environmental and erosion, access to microfinance, but also fertilizer, tools, other things that, let's just say I didn't learn about those in Harvard Medical School. So these partnerships have to be with local people who are the farmers. In Africa, too, it's the same thing. And they have to be with an eye towards both long-term sustainability, which everybody says, but also, again, having a safety net and not being reflexly against this safety net. And it's hard to do. It's hard to be the safety net. And this is another thing that I never would have imagined. One of you can see the Partners in Health logo on the back of this, but the Jeep. But this is actually called almost Hell's Deep. And it's not fun to have to buy these vehicles. Some friends of mine who have done that, given us the money to buy the vehicles, know they're expensive. And we need lots of them. We have, I mean, some of you would be shocked, I think, to learn how many employees we have in Haiti. And almost all of them, people who've never had a job before. Probably almost 4,000, all Haitians. And we also are serving, I would guess this year, 3 million patients. So now that we're working with the public sector, we're the largest purveyors of healthcare in the country, I would imagine. And so Jeeps, you have to have ambulances, you have to move staff. And imagine watching this Jeep get washed away. It's not like we got it back. Now, fortunately, no one was killed that day. But this place is always, threatening, or it also takes lives because people, especially women with obstructed labor, get stuck on the wrong side of this river, and how are they going to get across? So it's a big problem. And again, should it require entrepreneurial thinking to fix it? No, but it does because, again, you need public sector intervention to have a bridge. This is actually not the bridge. It's not done yet, but it's just another one in the area. So what we've done now is formed partnerships with the local people. Some of them own that little strip of land that we want to build the bridge over. The local mayor, who has the bridge? Actually, back to the UN, my friends at the UN had the bridge. And I said, oh, hi UN, why don't you give us that bridge? You have two. You don't need them both. They're called Bailey bridges, and they're supposed to be temporary, but they're solid as can be. And I hope I'm not getting myself or anybody from the UN in trouble, but and then it's a military occupying force, and so they're the ones who have the bridge. And we sweet talk them and say, please, Mr. Military Guys, give us the bridge, and please, Ministry of Public Health, help us with, of Public Works, help us with the bridge. Pulling all that coalition together, I believe this will be the last rainy season we'll ever watch people die trying to get across that river. God willing. So let's see. I feel like clapping too, frankly. And then last thing, and back to, this is the last example of partnership, and we'll get to talk about more. But a lot of people talk about microfinance. And anybody here from Foncoze? Again, great advertising on my part. Foncoze is is Haiti's largest bank for poor people. I'm proud to have been associated with it since its founding, and although I don't do any work. And it's explicitly for poor people, and mostly poor women have access. It's a microfinance bank. You guys know all about this. This is, never heard of it 10 years ago, right? Microfinance? No one ever talked about microfinance. Now everybody talks about it. But it's not a panacea. We actually are so committed to microfinance and financial services for poor people that we, Partners in Health, actually built 2 banks for them, with little safes and everything, which is kind of cool. And they were insisting on their color scheme, by the way, which reminds me very much of my public high school, purple, gold, go team, go. But it's kind of orange and purple. Anyway, so we built 2 banks with them because we believe poor people should have access to financial services. But there are some people who come into the clinic and say, well, I'd really like to take out they don't say micro loan, they just say loan. But it's all micro, $50, however many. And they say, but I can't afford, the interest, I can't pay it back. And, when someone weighs, 90 pounds and is saying, I can't pay it back and I'm hungry and I'm sick, it's not like I'm going to say, oh, come on, stop exaggerating. It's true. And so, again, the safety net. And it becomes entrepreneurial in the age of looking for panaceas and magic bullets with microfinance. Or, again, it's a long list of magic bullets we're looking at. There aren't any, that's what I'm saying. Lots of things can help. Lots of partnerships can help. Entrepreneurial thought is required all across the boards in development work and in global health too. But we have to do the hard work of building these safety nets. And we know what they would look like. They would include clean water, they would include primary health care, they include family planning, they include women's health, they certainly include treatment for whatever the leading killer of adults is. And that's the challenge before us. We want to be entrepreneurial. Try to bring this notion to bear on these problems and being very, very careful never to undermine the need for these basic safety nets. And frankly, there's another troubling side, and I'll just open it up for discussion here, is sometimes I feel, and actually Paul Collier said this. You guys know who Paul Collier is? He wrote a book called The Bottom Billion, which is very widely read. He's an Oxford economist. And I was with him 2 weeks ago at a conference around Haiti, and he said Haiti is has the best trade deal going, and he was talking about pulling Haiti out of this kind of poverty and this trap. And he's an economist, and I'm not, in case you haven't noticed. By the way, I'm a good friend of Jeffrey Sachs, and he reviewed my last book in a very widely circulated magazine, Natural History. And it was a rave review, but he basically said, as far as the economics go, it's kind of vulgar Marxism. I took that as a huge compliment. He didn't mean it that way. But Paul Collier is an economist, and Jeff Sachs was there too, and the three of us were on a panel. So the doctor and two economists, and talking in the Minister of Plan, as they call it. He was there from Haiti. And Paul Collier said, this is the best place. It could be an easy win with the right kind of investments and job creations. And I believe it. But we can't forget these basic safety nets. And that means stronger public health and public education in Haiti. And it's going to be entrepreneurial, believe it or not, for us to find ways to link the private sector ideas and nimble dynamics and all the things that get celebrated sometimes overmuch from the private sector, to link that to these public institutions that badly need a little bit of love. Public education, public health, roads, water. And again, it's not very jazzy. It doesn't sound like entrepreneurial thinking, but it's so important in Latin America at least, but also in places I've been in Haiti. And if we want to break that cycle of poverty and disease, let's apply some of this thinking to these problems that can, at the same time, strengthen basic services for poor people. Thank you, and I look forward to talking. Thank you.
Well, that was fantastic. So now we're opening it up to questions. Mahote and Karen are holding the pseudo microphones that we like to use at NYU. And yeah, so if you just want to go to the aisles and ask away.
Thank you, Caroline. So who would start?
I'll start
yes,
over here.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for this speech. And you talked a few moments about rights, and you mentioned some law students and some lawyer support.
Yeah.
And I know there are a few law students here tonight, and my name's Karen. I'm a 2008 Reynolds Fellow from the law school. And my question is, what are some critical ways that lawyers can support or promote entrepreneurial efforts in public health?
I think that's a great question. I would just go back to the work that we already have done with NYU Law School. It was, again, shockingly entrepreneurial to just ask this question: how do we apply a rights-based legal framework to social and economic rights? I had no idea 15 years ago that there was this sort of warring faction between various rights groups. I mean, I didn't know 15 years ago. It's been going on for decades and decades, more like 60, 70 years. So the big split, it turns out, and some people, certainly a lot of people in rights law know this, is between civil and political rights and social and economic rights. But right to health care, by the way, I didn't say anybody could leave yet. Right to health care, right to health care and right to education are social and economic rights. And those are important. If you're in my line of work, those are the right to water. So when we, I actually edited a journal with a lot of people, some of them from NYU Law School, by the way, Karen, called Health and Human Rights. And a bunch of them are lawyers and some are doctors and all kinds of different, it's mostly lawyers and doctors. And we're saying, okay, let's apply this framework, which is, has a lot of legal scholarship behind it, to these questions. Again, it turns out that's entrepreneurial thinking, at least in North America and Western Europe. Maybe it's not elsewhere, I don't know. But the idea of how we can identify and even enforce social and economic rights is still a hot topic. Our country, mine, and judging by your accent, yours, hasn't even signed the International Convention on Social and Economic Rights, or Economic and Social Rights, or whatever. We haven't signed it. And there are lots of other rights treaties that we haven't signed to, and I think we should. I think maybe we will. But it's going to cause a lot of problems, even legally. Let me give one little example, and I'll keep going. And maybe we can talk about this, and you can talk to some of our NYU colleagues too, since you're there. I went to a high-ranking government official in Haiti. This was one of the elected, when there was this is some years ago. You could do the math and figure out who I'm talking about. And very sympathetic to the social and economic rights platform. In fact, it had been this particular person's platform for his entire adult life. And he was, like I said, high-ranking, elected person. And I said, you know, you really ought to ratify this convention. And he said, you know, I'm really interested. He said, I did notice that your country hasn't ratified it. And we had a little chuckle. And he said, you know what I'm worried about? Is that when we ratify it, at the same time that our arms are being twisted by aid embargoes and international structural adjustment programs, then not only are we unable to serve the poor with these basic services, we're also held culpable for it. And I thought, oh my God, he's exactly right. Even human rights conventions can be turned against people. And you know, that shouldn't be so obvious, but it was an epiphany for me. So then I went back to my lawyer friends and said, lawyer friends, this guy's right. So what's the problem here? It's a transnational problem, and we only have national laws. International law is very weak on these scores. And so we've been working on this ever since, together. Now 5 years, 6 years. Bless you. If you keep sneezing, I'll be glad to check your lungs out afterwards. That's probably not very funny tonight, but. So that's just an example, and we've, you could look on the NYU, on each of our websites, our Partner Center at NYU, at Partners in Health and RFK Memorial, we've described this. And I think you might find this journal interesting, because it really is about the question you asked, public health rights, but not just a simple punitive trap of rights, but really progressive engagement. One last thing, there's a group called National Economic and Social Rights Initiative, NESRI. Anybody here from NESRI? Again, I've done a very bad job. This is the only group I know of in the United States that is focused exclusively on economic and social rights, and it's run by a brilliant lawyer named Kathy Albisa, and who really has grappled with this all of her professional life. And I think, she and I have been to NYU before to give sort of a, you know, dog and pony show about economic and social rights. So there's a lot going on, and we'd welcome more help. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Farmer.
Thank
I'm
you.
Jane Lewicki-Zuka, and I'm also with the Reynolds Program and at Wagner.
I'm just seeing how those mics look now.
It's ridiculous. I feel like you should be on the phone over there, too. In terms of the issue you posed with regard to
Yes, Jane?
coordination of all of these activities, coordination.
Yeah.
What problems have you seen over the decades or potential new opportunities for changing the way national development strategies have been undertaken? And also, this could be a separate question we can talk about later if I'm getting too much into one shot here, but also how the Global Fund, for example, and other health initiatives, global health initiatives, have either failed to or been successful at doing better coordination, particularly around strategies that are specific to emergencies, and connecting them with development, for example, or thinking out of the box.
Yep. Well, let me just say that those are, to me, really two sides of the same coin. Have I used that metaphor? I did that already once tonight, and I apologize. And I think, Jen, you know what I mean, that the second specific question about the Global Fund and PEPFAR really brings up issues that are about coordination and about a broader mandate. And so let me start with the second, and just so that in the interest of concision, which is, as you can tell, my strong suit. This is why I write 2-page long footnotes in my books, and why some kid would come up and say, I thought you'd be a cranky old man. So I call them punitive footnotes. Like, don't mess with me. I got this footnote already, so here. But the Global Fund and PEPFAR are what in public health, people in public health will know this, and there's some people here tonight who do this, are called vertical programs, right? So they're focused on one area, one problem. And what would be the opposite, horizontal or integrated programs? And the problem, in my view, of these debates is that they've now become overly simplistic. So you have people saying, well, there's too much energy being put into AIDS and not enough into, and then fill in the blank with the preferred pathology du jour of that person. of that critic. And some of them are not partisan like that, but they're still wrong. Because I just showed that the first disbursements ever by the Global Fund occurred in Haiti, and they just were 5 minutes ago, it feels like, in terms of this whole long epidemic. And those three pathologies are the leading, it's 6 million deaths a year. It's not like those are trivial matters compared to anything else either. But the way we did it was to say, let's not have this balkanized fight about schistosomiasis versus malaria or whatever. Or, the thing that was stunning to me is that you get experts in tuberculosis and HIV, and they actually fight with each other. Meanwhile, the virus and the bacterium cooperate just fine. So they are together in people's bodies, the leading killers of young adults in Africa, period. And so they get along just fine, and we can't coordinate ourselves. It's very problematic. But the good thing is there are strategies. And I would go so far as to say our next step, and this is also, it's to be done, I think, in a collegial, cheerleading kind of way. Like, let's celebrate PEPFAR. All right? It had some silly ideological add-ons, but they're not fundamental. We can get rid of them. In fact, PEPFAR 2.0, I don't know if that's jargon or if they're really going to call it that, is actually much better. And the critiques that we made back to the using vertical programs to strengthen horizontal programs, this is the same waiting room that I showed you brand new on the day it was, that's what it looks like now. This is just a couple weeks old. I think it looks kind of good. Any Haitians here will notice the art is just the windows. Instead of windows, we have basically Haitian metal sculpture. But that may seem far afield from your question, but I don't think it is. It's using these vertical programs to strengthen primary health care instead of arguing that there's too much money going into AIDS, which is absurd, because there's never been enough money going to any pathology of poor people in the history of the world, period. Love, Paul. So I think that academics and people at universities have to be very careful about, because academics have a lot of prestige, and even in, not so much in the last 8 years, but even in, that was a little polemic, even in public health, people are going to listen. And I was very surprised to hear some of my friends who are AIDS activists refer to these debates as the academic debates and the academics. And I suddenly realized that I was part of that group. No, that's okay. I'm a teacher, right? Good teacher. And but I think that's what we need to do is to, and what would be the pragmatic implications? Okay, choose 10 indicators. Let's get together. We're getting together actually in May with a group of activists and say, what are the 10 indicators that would be a better report card on PEPFAR or the Global Fund than enrollment? That's the main report card now, but that's okay. It was an emergency run. It's got the E word in it, emergency in the PEPFAR. All right, it's okay. We can fix it, make it better. Now, what would be a good example of an indicator that's much more robust? Maternal mortality, right? Is a much better report card on a health system. Why? Because it should be an indirect report card on family planning, women's health, reproductive health, and certainly on capacity for very complex interventions. Not very. I mean, I assume if they're called cesarean sections, they're old. Caesar, right? I mean, is there a historian of medicine here? So they, this is got to be around for a couple thousand years, a cesarean section. So obstructed labor kills. I would say, okay, some people would argue, but I think it kills 500,000 women die every year in childbirth. So, you may say, well, it's hemorrhage, well, it's infection, but it's really started by obstructed labor. And obstructed labor is a surgical pathology, right? And if you use that as a really, a rigorous criterion, how well does your PEPFAR program do at improving primary health care all the way from family planning to ambulatory clinic for non-infectious pathologies to maternal mortality, then I think we've got, a step 2 beyond the emergency approach. And I think that, I don't think people in the government are hostile to that now, And I think there's the new leader of PEPFAR has just been named, I think yesterday. He's very sympathetic to this kind of work. And he has some experience in government too. His name's Eric Gooseby. So I think we're going to see the sunny years of global health ahead of us if we can avoid all these balkanized fights. And that was a very long answer, and I apologize, but this is sort of very much what I do on a daily basis, in terms of thinking and teaching, how to strengthen these vertical programs and make them serve all prevention, all pathologies, et cetera. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for coming tonight. Last summer I actually worked with Foncosé briefly.
How did I do describing it?
Oh, great. Yeah, it's perfect.
You're going to give me a good report card?
I
You
will,
didn't
I
raise
will.
your hand when I said anybody from
I'll go back to Ann Hastings and tell her you did well. And actually this summer I'll be going back and working in Fondois with a university there. But my question is not entirely related to microfinance, though. Now, Haiti is also, aside from being the poorest country in the hemisphere, it also has the most open economy in the Americas. And insofar as we were discussing identifying the root causes of a lot of these problems, a lot of these trade policies present major constraints to the rural population and can be seen as one of the major causes, one of the major reasons for their decisions, how they manage their land. How do you view the entrepreneurial approach kind of tackling this issue, which is something much larger, much more political?
That's a really great question. What's your name?
Constantino.
Okay. Is that you under that hat? Yeah. Anyway, that's a great question. Let me give a couple of examples, first of the pathology and then of the and diagnosis and then of the prescription. And sorry to keep using medical metaphors, but they're not so bad. So trade policies that are bad, take one. I'll take trade policies that are bad for 500, please. So I was there in 1986. You probably were still, breastfeeding or something at that age. But and I remember that there was an effort by the international financial institutions to open up Haiti's economies. And so the figure that the fact that you said Haiti is the most open economy in the Western Hemisphere comes from Oxfam, right? That's where I got it. They did a study. You probably got better primary data. And I wasn't surprised when I read it. And because I lived through 1986. And some IFIs, maybe 87, and again, a historian needs to look carefully, and somebody ought to be writing about this, some history, human rights nerd at NYU or something. So in 1986-87, the IFIs, International Financial Institutions, went in and they talked to the government of Haiti. Now, who is the government of Haiti? A bunch of generals and military people, and said, we'll give you X if you give us Y. And the X was credit, big loans, capital, which are needed. You can't, look at the U.S. government. You think we can run the U.S. government without credit? And I'm stunned when I don't even know anything about it, but it's run on credit markets as we are discovering. Is that false, Bob? Did I say that right? It's as close as I can get to finance. So it's not just cash, it's credit. They need it. Now, what was the quid pro quo? Open up your markets to rice and sugar. Now, meanwhile, one might ask, were one fair-minded, is the U.S. market open up to rice and sugar imports? Does it subvention and have tariffs? And the answer is lots of subvention, lots of tariffs. So I don't know about tariffs, but I do know that the farm bill, or whatever it's called, means that there's no way that a farmer from that now flooded area of Haiti could ever compete with Dixie Crystals or wherever grows those things. I'm from Florida, that's what I remember. So in 1986, 1 year, Haiti, once the largest exporter of sugar in the world, started being a net importer of sugar. And next what? Coffee? So that's an unfair trade policy. And even a layperson who's not an economist and doesn't play one on TV can recognize that. Now, what would be an entrepreneurial response to that? And there are lots of them going on already. So people will go and say, you know what, we're going to try to redevelop the rice market. Or we did a program with coffee, for example, fair trade coffee from Haiti. You can get it on our website. That's cool. We're also trying to get a group of people who are progressive businessmen, and they're mostly men, but businessmen and businesswomen who believe in labor rights, labor protection, green energy. I was about to say yada, yada, yada. We've started a project called 1,000 Jobs for Haiti. And we'd like to say, is it that hard to develop something that is not in healthcare and education, that is generative in industry in rural Haiti, that has fair labor practices? So those are good things, those are examples, and you guys can make a longer list, and Foncosé has tons of examples, as you know. However, the problem is, we need all of those efforts, again, to add up to more than the sum of their parts. Otherwise, it's a nothing compared to the vast wave of bad policies. In other words, you can have 1,000, let me give even one example. I heard it from let's just say a very wealthy Haitian. I was shocked that I had anything in common with him, any opinion. I didn't say this, I kept it to myself. And some of you know about temporary protected status, TPS. We've got 30,000 Haitians, all right, who are detained for deportation to Haiti. And a lot of us, some of you have been fighting, and speaking about immigration law and Karen's point, a lot of us have been fighting really hard to grant TPS to Haitians because we don't believe they should be deported. Now, secretly, I don't believe anybody should be deported, but that's another story. Now, this Haitian industrialist said, if we create 30,000 more jobs and we deport 30,000 people, that's a net nothing for us. He's right. I thought, wow, I agree with him on something. So, again, it's an example of creating 30,000 jobs would be great. They need 150, 300,000 jobs, as you might imagine, more. But we can't have other policies. I gave the example of an immigration policy and trade policies that just sweep away our efforts. It's like what I do in my practice as a doctor is I put on Band-Aids, and I tell people who are medical students and nurses or doctors and nurses, don't be ashamed of Band-Aids, bandages. They're not bad. It's just that they're not the cause of these problems. We don't have to be embarrassed that we have a very sort of distal, if that's the word, intervention, but we have to acknowledge the large-scale forces that are really overwhelming us. So entrepreneurial interventions, I think Foncosé will come up with them, Engineers Without Borders and business tycoons without borders. Well, business tycoons have no borders. But all sorts of groups, entrepreneurial and otherwise, will come up with these, but we have to really think also about these trade policies. And I thank you for allowing me to talk about that. I can't get over it. Does this mean you're leaving, Constantino? What did I say? Something wrong?
Hello. My name is Sarah Hodgson. I'm a public health student, a Master's of Public Health student here. And you spoke about the whole safety net, the right to food, the right to clean water, education, et cetera, and then also environmental policy. And I mean, you could add to the list. But how do you or how do I limit where I go, or how does an organization limit or not limit what they do to make people healthy?
And I know just what you mean. And people say, well, why you're a subspecialist physician? Me, not you necessarily. Maybe you are also. Subspecialist infectious disease doctor. Why are you worrying about water projects? And my answer is because I just want someone else to worry about them besides us, and then we'll stop immediately. In other words, partnership for our organization, Partners in Health, and our sister organizations like Amis de la Santé, partnerships are our future. That's why it's our past too. That's why we call it Partners in Health, right? So to limit, this is what in the military, by the way, I went to the Naval Academy, my first time to a service academy, and it was kind of cool. I like being saluted by 4,000 men and women in uniform. It was, don't feed me that stuff. Anyway, but there was a morning, believe it or not, they have I had a great time. They have a seminar every year on poverty, global poverty. Did you know that? For many decades at the Naval Academy. And it was a morning talk, and it was probably too early in the morning, and for a regimented, they're probably over-regimented at the Naval Academy. If anybody's from here, don't get me in trouble with the Admiral. But they have to show up 3 times a day and say, all present or accounted for, sir. I said, do they do this every day? And they said 3 times a day. So I think they kind of let loose at night. I'm not sure, I wasn't a witness, but they looked pretty hungover in the morning. Anyway, or maybe it was just my talk wasn't very funny, but I said to them, I was talking about our work in Africa, and I said, well, it's hard to explain, but Partners in Health, we're kind of the Navy SEALs of public health. So everybody laughed, and suddenly they were engaged. Back to your point. In military parlance, people talk about mission creep, and that has worked into popular parlance. You've heard it in public health a lot. We hear it in public health all the time. This is your mission, this is your metric, don't have mission creep. And the safety net people, SNPs as we call them, we don't really call them that, but people interested in the safety net should have a division of labor. And again, back to the central point, it is now almost entrepreneurial to coordinate activities in a creative way. Because if we can split up the labor so that you can focus on public health and I can focus on infectious disease and on, I think that would be great. But there's got to be agreement, and this is my whole appeal, and this is now the third year that I've made this appeal here. Gabe's already looking at his watch. We have to have this broad agreement on safety nets. And I was shocked to read Stephen Lewis's book, Race Against Time. Did anybody, who read it? Come on, it's a good book, it's short. This pocket of people over here have read everything I've mentioned. Who are you people? But it's a book by a guy who was Canadian ambassador to the UN, progressive fellow. It's actually the father-in-law of Naomi Klein. Bet you, who's read, Shock Doctrine? All right, well, he wouldn't be that jealous. In other words, what are you guys reading, Twilight? So in any case, he wrote in his book, Race Against Time, it's really most about AIDS, but I was very interested to hear what he'd write about UNICEF because he was the number 2 person in there. And he described an ongoing debate about whether or not UNICEF, the most important child advocacy group in the world, would unequivocally support free primary education for girls or anybody. And I thought, wow, I didn't know it was a subject of debate. Now, he may be telling, I'm sure he's telling his own version. I bet he generated a lot of irritation at UNICEF. But if it's a debate at UNICEF, like it's back to Jane's question, if it's a debate inside public health or whether we're putting too much money into disease X when we ignored it for decades, that's the kind of debates I don't think we should have. We should have debates about judicious use of resources, how they can strengthen broader goals, and then a division of labor that makes sense for people living in poverty so that we can break that cycle of poverty and disease. That's what public health should do. It should do the same thing in the United States. I have to fight on a regular basis, and this city, I hope is going to be clearly on our side to say we need community health workers in the United States for chronic disease, and they have to be trained and paid, and their labor has to be respected. Yeah, go ahead, fine. And that is a debate. Now we have the stimulus package. I was in Washington yesterday and went to testify in Congress with some progressive groups. And I swear to God, there was a line of lobbyists snaking out in the street. It took 20 minutes to get in the door. And I talked to a friend of mine who's a nurse from Partners in Health. I said, stimulus junkies. Because they're there for money, which is, who knows who they represent. I hope it's good. But we got to have public health be very unequivocal that we need a safety net in Haiti as much as in the United States as much as Haiti, and that here are the components, and here's why I would divide labor. And then we can not have this mission creep overwhelm people like me or you, I think. I have a friend who's in tuberculosis world. I see her over there. She takes care of patients here in New York. And she knows all about drugs that I know about and their doses, but I know that she also has to worry about, what do they call it here? Not the metro. Subway fare or cab fare, or housing, or English as a second language. And this is what we have to do, and we'd be glad if someone else would help us with that. But until that happens in public health, we're obligated to keep talking about it.
Hi, I'm Madeline. I'm a Reynolds undergraduate scholar.
I can't get over these phone things.
Yeah.
Where do they come from? It's like, get smart. Is that from your shoe or something? Go ahead, sorry.
When you showed...
If they hadn't remade that into a movie with the young hipsters, you wouldn't know what I was talking about.
Yeah, that's true. I was reminded when you showed the pictures of the flooding in Haiti of Hurricane Katrina, which of course is also a natural disaster. And I remember seeing on the news somebody saying, a victim of the storm saying, why aren't there brigades of concerned citizens coming down here with their minivans, picking up people and taking them out? And so my question is, where's that disconnect, do you think? Why aren't individuals convinced of the rights-based approach, or why aren't they acting on it?
Yeah. Well, that's an ugly question, as you know, and that was that's a light. Is that a light and a mic, or just a light? Speaking into, it's like the phone. Let me speak into the light. So all that time, that's never been a mic? You could have told me that. I mean, they think, that I'm, never mind. So, thanks a lot, Gabe, Brad, Caroline. So it's an ugly story. It's a polemic question, but listen, we have to understand racism in our country to understand Katrina. You know, hypothesis number 745. So it's not just about rights-based approaches. You called it a natural disaster. I know what you meant. It's an unnatural disaster, right? It also happened the same year that this city that I mentioned was whacked by Hurricane Jeanne. It wasn't even Hurricane Jeanne, it was Tropical Storm Jeanne. Because Haiti had been denuded of trees, you know, it killed 2,000 people in Haiti, more than died with Katrina. And, you know, it's easy to talk about, it's not easy to talk about racism, actually. It's very complicated. You know, how do you understand structural racism and the history and legacy of racism and disdain for poor people, which is two overlapping sets of problems, and disdain for public good. I told you about this neoliberal. Now, Naomi Klein, have you read her book? Which some people regard as too much of a polemic. I don't know. I've learned a lot from it. Granted, wasn't busy reading Twilight, but actually my daughter read it, so I had to read it too. So Naomi Klein makes the argument that Hurricane Katrina not only reveals structural problems in our society, which it does, and you know, inadequacies in engineering, et cetera, but also the response reveals why, to get back to your exact words, the lack of engagement with rights-based approaches leads to things like contractors of dubious virtue. And she ties it all together. Maybe she overdoes it. I don't know. Like I said, I like the analysis. I would recommend that you look at that. Then back to my friends at Nesri. I can't believe there's no one from Nesri here. That's my bad again. Truly no one from Nesri here? So they're working with because I'm part of that group too, we're working with a group of community organizations in New Orleans in those areas, those parishes, to try and ask how can we build rights-based approaches from the, I hate saying ground up, but you know what I mean, from these grassroots groups, neighborhood groups, church groups, community organizations, et cetera. But I think the diagnosis, again, is historical and structural. The prescription is, as you said, we have to look back, and people are saying, well, we can't look back at what we've done over X, Y, or Z years. You've heard this all the time. It's in the papers every day now, right? The debate. And when I hear our president say, we don't want to look back at that, I don't think he means it. How about that? It reminded me of a quotation that I showed to my students at Harvard College that from FDR, a labor organizer. Here, let me explain it to you better with the light. A labor organizer went to see him. And this guy is a hero to me more and more. He couldn't walk for the last 26 years of his life. And just looking at the things that he did, it gets me kind of choked up. So a labor organizer went to see him in D.C. And he said, whatever he said, union person. And FDR is said to have said to him, I agree with what you said. I want to do what you said. Now go out and make me do it. And this is where I think, in addition to legal frameworks that we need good policy environments so we don't have such weak responses to disasters like that. And we need that, but we also need, as you said, people in their minivans going to pitch in. And to do that, we have to work at both the large-scale efforts, but also, I hate to use community-based as jargon, but I think we have to do both. And these could come together. And I don't want to sound utopian, but it's better than being dystopian. And I think we have a lot of work to do in this country around rights-based approaches, especially social and economic rights. Thank you. Not that I feel strongly about it. I mean, who else almost gets choked up thinking about FDR? That's pitiful.
Hi, can you hear me? Yes. Yeah. My name is Jamie Zimmerman, and as a medical student focused on health equity, I definitely agree with your assessment that health is, it should be an unalienable human right. And I definitely, of course, applaud your efforts and your wish to universally kind of abolish user fees.
Here comes the but.
But, yes, how did you know? My question would be, when you're working in regions like the Central Plateau of Haiti or remote areas of Rwanda, you're probably not encountering a lot of people who could truly afford to pay user fees.
That's right.
But what would you say about places where for example, in certain regions of India,
Yeah.
where extreme poverty exists and is a huge barrier to necessarily getting the care that people would like to provide for their families, but there's a large range of incomes in a region.
Yeah.
What would you say to the medical director of a hospital who says, if we don't have user fees, then we'll be overrun by people who could afford private hospitals?
Yeah. Well, I hear that all the time anyway. I don't have to go to Peru. I mean, I don't have to go to India. I played my card there. I was thinking of the places that have a India is not a place I know, but there is this big middle class and all these gazillionaires and all these poor people. It's and in the world's largest democracy, et cetera, et cetera. Wow. Do you know they actually took the trouble of printing out something in large font that says "last question"? So I've never seen one printed out. Is that entrepreneurial? So I hear this all the time, whether I'm with poor, in really poor places like Rwanda or Burundi or Haiti, or middle income places like, Peru, or industrialized places like Boston and Russia. So in every place I go, I hear it. But from whom do I hear it? Never once from patients, never once from their family members, not one time in 25 years. And as you said, you mentioned a hospital administrator, exactly, or a politician. And I'm going to say something that may surprise you, and that is, I don't have a formula about this. I just keep going back to the safety net, because I've already tried to work out formulae, to say, okay, here's a good financing mechanism for healthcare for poor people in poor, middle income, whatever. And I guess what strikes me is the universality of that question from the non-poor, true, my peers who are, professionals. The absence of that question from poor people are saying, hey, remove the user fees, we'll fill up your hospital. And there's one idea I have is we could rehabilitate the notion of a right to health care and then develop, at the same time, obviously, we have to have financing strategies that will work for any given place. And the good thing about starting this work for me in Haiti is that, and as I mentioned earlier, I started, in of all places, a squatter settlement of people displaced by a huge hydroelectric dam, and which was built by, guess who? Halliburton. Brown and Root, didn't they buy, wasn't that owned by Halliburton? So there's this historical continuity. First you get, the European predations in the New World, right? So all the indigenous people of Haiti wiped out. Not a single one survived. And then you have these vast slave plantations, well, not vast big, but vast in terms of churning out again, the world's largest producers of tropical produce. So all these analyses that would be just national that we get from health economists, like what is the GDP of this area, and we'll tell you how to use it most wisely, they're just not fair. Any more than if you're in a squatter settlement and you say, all right, we need a sustainable, cost-effective program for this squatter settlement for health care. And I would submit to you that you cannot do that. It's like saying, look, we have, well, no, this is, that patient's from the Bronx. Here's the model for the Bronx, here's the model for Manhattan, right? Here's what's sustainable for the Upper East Side, and here's what's sustainable for the Bronx. So we don't do that in New York with reason, right? But, these are fairly arbitrary political and administrative boundaries that we've set up, and to use an anthropological expression, we've fetishized. Actually, that's probably from Marx, isn't it? We've reified, we've fetishized them, so now they look like something more solid than they are. But what they really do, very often, is erase history, political economy, all these other, like Constantino from Foncose was saying, they erase, a lot of transnational trade issues. Now, you may say, as a medical student, gee, that seems like an awful lot to master, Dr. Zimmerman might be thinking, as a medical student and future physician, and it is. And I'm saying, again, partnerships, entrepreneurial thinking. We can't figure all this stuff out on our own. Certainly not for this country. We're 16% of our GDP is going into healthcare. And we have 50 million people without insurance. And they tell us, the car makers tell us that they spend more on health insurance than steel. You know that they're telling the truth about that, I'm sure. Aren't they? And somebody is an economist or a Detroit person can tell me. But so we have all these structural problems here, too, and we don't have the safety net. So I guess what I'm saying is, out of humility, it might be okay to say, you know what, we don't know the answer to all these questions, whether posed by hospital administrators or posed by heads of state or advanced by economists with their own agendas. We don't know. But we do know that at the very least, we're going to must have protective structures for the citizenry. And if rich people, or people who can pay, invade our hospitals, it happens in Haiti sometimes. They come from Port-au-Prince because they know we're providing good care. But it happens a lot less than people are saying. The rich people in Haiti just go to Miami for their medical care, really. But it's until we have this equity plan that is really global health equity. Again, some people are using that term, also a fairly recent term. Until we have that, we're going to have to be, again, we're holding the bag. You'll be holding the bag too. And if someone in India says, look, here's our user fee structure, like it or leave it, there will be poor people who don't get in. And they're going to have another parallel system built for them too, by a bunch of NGOs and church groups and entrepreneurs. I'm saying it would be much better if we could attack this structurally and work out a plan with the public health infrastructure to try and make sure that some people aren't turned away. And I think addressing that with humility and saying, look, I'm sorry, I don't know, I'm a doctor, is okay. And then we just add, however, we insist that it be done. Well, thank you all very much for having me back. Thank you.